You think your greatest weapon is your intelligence? Schopenhauer would tell you that's exactly why you keep losing. You've sat in the room, the boardroom, the family dinner, maybe a comment section. Someone speaks with complete, unshakable confidence about something they fundamentally don't understand. You feel the pressure building. Your mind maps every flaw in their logic. You construct the perfect argument. You present it clearly. You expect reason to do its job. They blink and double down. You leave the interaction drained, questioning your own sanity. Here's what no one tells you. You didn't lose because your argument was wrong. You lost because you brought a scalpel to a street fight. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most cold-blooded observers of human nature who ever lived, studied this dynamic 2 centuries ago. He didn't write a self-help book about it. He wrote a blueprint, and in that blueprint is a hidden architecture, almost ruthless in its precision, for neutralizing willful ignorance without wasting a single calorie of your intelligence on it. Once you understand this, you won't be frustrated by stupid people anymore. You'll study them the way a chess player studies a predictable opponent. We'll cover 3 of Schopenhauer's weapons, and at the end, I'll show you the most brutal, real-world application of this philosophy. A historical case where a man used strategic stupidity to seize an empire. Stay for that. First, you need to understand why you keep losing to people who are objectively wrong. Schopenhauer identified it in The Art of Being Right. People don't argue to find truth. They argue to establish dominance. Read that again. Dunning and Kruger confirmed it empirically in 1999. The people most confident in their views are frequently the least equipped to evaluate them. The very skills required to be competent are the same skills required to recognize competence. The incompetent can't see their own incompetence. They live in a fortress of unearned certainty, and it is warm inside. Daniel Kahneman mapped the mechanism. The mind runs on 2 systems. System 1, fast, emotional, instinctual. System 2, slow, deliberate, logical. You're operating in System 2. The fool never left System 1. They feel something, attach a label to it, and call it a fact. You're not having a debate. You're experiencing a translation error. You're speaking mathematics to a barking dog. Schopenhauer went further than just observing this. He traced exactly why logic fails at the biological level. The human ego doesn't process contradiction as information. It processes it as a threat. When you present a fool with evidence that contradicts their worldview, you haven't triggered their curiosity. You've triggered their immune system. The psychologist Leon Festinger called it cognitive dissonance. The deep discomfort a mind feels when confronted with evidence that contradicts what it already believes. What he found is that most people, when faced with this discomfort, don't update their beliefs. They double down on them. The discomfort of being wrong is physically identical to the discomfort of being attacked. So the fool responds the way any creature responds to an attack, with aggression, denial, or retreat into a louder version of the same wrong position. This is why the angrier you make them with your logic, the more certain they become that they're right. You're not enlightening them, you're calcifying them. Every perfectly constructed argument you deliver doesn't chip away at their fortress. It adds another brick. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The more intelligent your argument, the more threatening it feels to someone operating from ego. The better your evidence, the more their identity feels at stake. Your competence is the problem, not your delivery, not your tone, not how patient you were. The architecture of their mind simply does not support what you're trying to install. Schopenhauer was blunt about this in a way that modern psychology has spent decades tiptoeing around. Some minds are structurally resistant to truth, not temporarily, not fixably with the right words, structurally. Accepting this is uncomfortable, but until you accept it, you will keep re-entering the same losing fight, with better arguments and worse results. Worse, you're doing all the work. You're spending energy crafting a reasoned argument while they spend zero energy simply refusing it. They don't outsmart you, they outlast you. Here's the brutal truth Schopenhauer arrived at. Logic has no currency in a debate with a fool. Trying to reason with someone committed to their own ignorance is not noble. It is intellectual suicide. Point 1. Reductio ad absurdum. Agree violently. So what do? You stop fighting them. You weaponize their own momentum. When you argue with a fool, you give them exactly what they want. Friction. Friction makes them feel important. Your frustration is proof that they matter. Every counter-argument you make is a message that says, your idea is worth my time and my anger. Schopenhauer's first weapon: don't disagree, agree. But agree so violently, so completely, that you accelerate their argument to its logical, catastrophic conclusion. In philosophy, it's called reductio ad absurdum. In practice, it's simply handing someone enough rope. A colleague insists that modern art is a scam and anyone could paint a masterpiece. The instinct is to argue about technique, history, subjective value. Stop. Instead, lean in, nod. You're completely right. In fact, since it's that easy, we should quit our jobs today. Buy paint this afternoon. You do the canvases. I'll find the gallery. We'll be millionaires by Friday. Why are we even in this office? Watch their eyes. You haven't attacked them. You've validated their premise entirely. But you've forced them to look at where their own logic leads. And the fool never thinks 3 steps ahead. Their mind short-circuits. They start injecting nuance. They argue against themselves to save face. You didn't defeat them with your intelligence. You defeated them with theirs. Now notice what just happened in that interaction. You spent almost no energy. You agreed. You smiled. You accelerated their logic to its conclusion and let it detonate. Meanwhile, they spent enormous energy, defending, backtracking, recalibrating, saving face. This is the fundamental power inversion Schopenhauer was pointing at. Most intelligent people enter a conflict assuming the fight will be won by whoever has the best argument. So they invest in argument quality, research, preparation, rhetoric. But the fool isn't playing that game. The fool is playing an endurance game. They win not by being right, but by exhausting you. They win by making the cost of continuing the argument higher than the cost of conceding. They drag you into the mud and rely on the fact that mud is their natural habitat. When you flip the energy equation, when you become the one spending nothing while they spend everything defending their own logic against itself. The game is over before they realize it started. Think of it as psychological judo. You use their force, their momentum, their conviction, and you redirect it. They lunge forward and you step aside. The weight they threw at you carries them over the edge. Schopenhauer understood that the intellect, as powerful as it is still a servant to the will, the raw emotional drive that runs beneath every argument a human being makes. The fool's will is strong, unshakable even, but you don't fight the will, you redirect it. And a will that's been redirected at its own premise has nowhere to go but collapse. This is also why Schopenhauer warned against the need to be recognized as right. Intelligent people are addicted to that moment. The moment the other person concedes, sees reason, acknowledges the argument. You want the moral victory declared. But seeking validation from a fool is, in his words, the ultimate form of stupidity. Why do you need a blind man to compliment your painting? The moment you release that need, the need to be seen as right by someone incapable of seeing clearly, You become immune to their provocations. You stop handing them the remote control to your emotional state. Let them hold the wrong belief. Let them walk into the world with a broken map. It is not your obligation to fix them. It is your obligation to protect yourself from the cost of trying. But what if they're not a colleague? What if they're someone you can't avoid? Someone you see every day, someone who has authority over you? Then the game changes entirely. Point 2. The avatar. Be present, intellectually absent. You cannot always walk away. Fools are your managers, your clients, your relatives, sometimes your blood. Schopenhauer had a name for this, the porcupine dilemma. On a cold winter night, porcupines huddle together for warmth, but their quills pierce each other, forcing them apart, trapped between freezing in isolation and bleeding in proximity. The intelligent person must master distance. When forced into proximity with irrational minds, Schopenhauer's prescription was this: deploy an avatar. The avatar is polite. The avatar smiles. The avatar speaks in short, agreeable sentences. Interesting perspective. I see what you mean. That's one way to look at it. The avatar gives them nothing to attack. It reflects their own noise back at them like a mirror, while your actual mind remains completely protected behind a wall of detachment. You are physically present, intellectually absent. They think they're winning. Let them. The illusion of victory is the cheapest toy you can give a fool to keep them quiet, and it costs you nothing. But there's a specific scenario that demands its own strategy. What happens when the fool doesn't just exist near you, but above you? What do you do when the irrational mind signs your paycheck, controls your promotion, or holds institutional authority over your work? This is where most intelligent people make their most costly mistake. They assume that competence will eventually be recognized, that if they just perform well enough, produce enough, demonstrate enough, the system will correct itself. Schopenhauer would call this naive to the point of self-destruction. Here is the psychology you need to understand. A person of low intellect, who's acquired power, is not operating from confidence. They're operating from a fault line of deep, unacknowledged insecurity. On some primal level, they sense they are outmatched by the minds around them. They can't name it, they can't articulate it, but they feel it, and they do not process that feeling as a motivation to learn. They process it as a threat to their survival. So when you walk into their environment and display your capability, when you solve a problem they couldn't, when you speak with clarity they lack, when you see the thing they missed, you're not demonstrating your value to them. You're holding up a mirror to their inadequacy. And a fool with power will shatter the mirror rather than examine the reflection. They won't attack your intelligence directly. That would require admitting it exists. They'll attack your character. They'll call you difficult, arrogant, not a team player, hard to work with. They'll use the bureaucracy of the institution to sand you down. Schopenhauer wrote it without softening. To display conspicuous intelligence in the presence of mediocrity is, in their eyes, an unpardonable sin. The mediocre mind experiences something close to physical pain in the presence of genuine competence. It triggers what he called a secret, knowing hatred. So what do? You do not out-reason a king in his own castle. You outmaneuver him. You make the mirror disappear. You give the powerful fool exactly what their ego is starving for, the feeling of superiority. Ask them for advice on things that don't matter. Let them correct you on minor, irrelevant details. Nod at the observation you identified 3 steps before they made it. You're not surrendering. You are anesthetizing. Every small scratch to your pride buys you something more valuable. Freedom of movement, the space to operate without being monitored, undermined, or threatened. This is what Machiavelli understood that most of his readers miss. The Prince is not a manual for tyrants. It's a survival guide for intelligent people trapped in systems run by lesser minds. The goal is never to win in the room. The goal is to win in the long game, while the fool believes they're winning the short one. Now you've learned how to neutralize a fool in debate and manage one in proximity. But there's a third layer, the one most people miss: the internal damage. What happens to you when you stay in constant contact with irrational minds? Point 3. Cognitive quarantine. Protect your mental diet. Stupidity is contagious. Not metaphorically, cognitively. Cognitive load theory tells us that mental bandwidth is strictly limited. When you navigate a highly irrational person's reality, your brain is running overtime, predicting unpredictable reactions, suppressing your frustration, walking on eggshells. This sustained taxation degrades your actual decision-making. You become irritable. Your creative edge dulls. You start making poor choices in areas that have nothing to do with that person. You're letting a parasite feed on your intellectual capital. Schopenhauer was notoriously solitary. People called him a misanthrope and said he hated humanity. Read his work carefully. He didn't hate people. He was simply ruthless about his mental diet. His logic was cold arithmetic. To engage with a fool is to halve your intelligence and double your exhaustion. The intelligent person's strategy isn't avoidance, it's selectivity. Not every conversation deserves your real self. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding requires clarification. You don't owe clarity to people who will distort it. You don't owe explanation to people who've already decided what they think. Silence in these moments isn't weakness. It's self-preservation dressed as restraint. Before we get to the case study, consider what all three of these weapons have in common. None of them require you to be seen. Reductio ad absurdum. You agree. You're invisible. The avatar. You're present, but untouchable. Invisible. Cognitive quarantine. You withdraw. Invisible. Schopenhauer's entire philosophy of dealing with stupidity converges on a single operating principle. The most dangerous intelligence is the intelligence that appears absent. History's most consequential minds understood this intuitively. They were not the loudest voices in the room. They were frequently the quietest. They spoke rarely, and when they did, the words landed differently because they hadn't been cheapened by constant use. Silence gave their words weight. Distance gave their actions impact. There's a line attributed to Voltaire that captures this exactly. Judge a man by his questions rather than his answers. The fool announces himself constantly. Every thought is immediately externalized. Every reaction is immediate, visible, unguarded. The intelligent person observes, collects, waits. The fool shows every card the moment it's dealt. You're playing a different game, one where you only reveal a card when the pot is worth taking. This patience is not passivity. It is the most active and disciplined form of intelligence, because the ability to not react, to absorb provocation without reflecting it back, to be insulted without responding, to be underestimated without correcting the assumption, requires more control than any argument you could win. It is control over yourself, and that is the rarest and most formidable kind. Now, the case study. Bonus. Sima Yi, the historical proof. The case study I promised you. This is the most complete application of Schopenhauer's philosophy ever recorded. And it happened 1,800 years before Schopenhauer was born. Sima Yi, arguably the most brilliant military strategist of the Three Kingdoms era in ancient China. The problem, he served under Cao Shuang, a regent of enormous power and staggering arrogance, shallow, impulsive, deeply threatened by Sima Yi's intellect. If Sima Yi challenged him, he and his entire bloodline would be executed. If he argued openly, he'd be crushed. His intelligence wasn't an asset in that environment. It was a death sentence. So Sima Yi did something almost incomprehensible. He faked senility. When Cao Shuang's spies came to observe him, Sima Yi performed the part of a dying, pathetic old man. He dropped his soup and let it spill down his robes. He confused names. He stared blankly. He looked completely broken. The spy reported back. The foolish regent laughed. He felt superior. He felt safe. He stopped viewing Sima Yi as a threat and dropped his guard entirely. The fool's ego was satisfied. Months later, while Cao Shuang was away on a hunting trip, Sima Yi dropped the act. He rose from his sickbed, orchestrated a lightning military coup, and seized the entire empire. Cao Shuang lost his head because he believed the performance. What Sima Yi understood, and what Schopenhauer would have recognized immediately, is this. Your intelligence is not a badge you wear on your chest. It is a concealed weapon. You do not draw a concealed weapon to show off. You keep it hidden until the exact moment it serves your purpose. When you are in the presence of a powerful fool, feed them what they're starving for: superiority. Let them correct you on minor details. Ask them for advice on trivial matters. Thank them for their insight. You are not submitting. You are anesthetizing them. You trade a small scratch to your ego for absolute, unhindered freedom of movement. Here's what shifts when you internalize this. Stupid people stop exhausting you. They become readable. You see the cognitive bias operating in real time. You see the ego defending itself. You see the pattern, and what is predictable can be managed. You stop being a participant in their chaos. You become an observer of it. This is not contempt. Contempt ties your emotional state to their behavior. What Schopenhauer offered was something colder, more useful, indifference rooted in understanding. They are not villains, they are a condition. And a wise person doesn't argue with the weather, they dress accordingly. Whether you're dealing with a fool in the boardroom or one at your dinner table, the principle is the same. Intelligence is most dangerous when it's invisible. If this landed, watch the next video on Machiavelli's hacks to control any woman. The hacks that worked before history started recording them.